Hey guys, welcome to Signal Before Silence. Today's episode is going to be a bit of a juicy and fun one. I am going to dive into mythology, a mythology that the West knows nothing about, but it's starting to become very curious and very perhaps key because we are being told, recently it's resurfacing, that during the Iraq War, United States troops were stationed in very key historic places and they were actually digging. And apparently, they were digging for Gilgamesh's tomb, is what we hear. We also hear, these are perhaps rumors, blanketed in what people were reporting, including some comments from people like Hillary Clinton, BBC reports, and it basically ends up sounding like the war was not so much about weapons of mass destruction, rather about finding this particular DNA that belongs to Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh also holds various names in history from different cultures. Gilgamesh, Nimrod, Baal, and Bel in Armenian mythology. All this talk resurfacing started, getting me thinking about all the history, archaeology, information that I've learned over the years, all the digging I've done, and including all the mythologies that I've kind of chucked it as unimportant, it's just a myth, and put it aside. But of course, I don't ever close all doors. I usually just create tabs and leave them open and kind of see how that plays out in the real world. But I like evidence, so for me, whenever we're talking about mythology, it's a bit more explorative. But some myths are becoming quite curious in this bizarre world where we are all witnessing some sort of a spiritual battle. Even people who would call themselves scientific, rational, mock those who are too quick to jump to the esoteric field and the spiritual field. All of a sudden, many such people are also starting to use verbiage like good and evil, spiritual battle. This is all about Baal worship and child sacrifice. And of course, with Epstein files coming out and confirming a global blood-sucking cabal, it's becoming more and more curious. Now, what I want to do in this episode, I want us to go to the oldest world map known in the world, which is the Babylonian Clay Table, learn a little bit what that is and what it has on it, what it means. We will touch up on some geography, we'll touch up on quite a lot in this episode, but it will be a very interesting one as to why are the elites, why is this powerful cabal who runs the world, boasts about running the world, but tells you that if you say we run the world, we're gonna silence you and ruin your life, also mocks you and laughs at you for claiming or bringing up any Kabbalah or child sacrifice or any ritualistic spiritual topics. They're saying, no, look at the science, look at the evidence. Are you stupid? What a low IQ position to talk about these archetypes and esoteric mythologies, yet they themselves visibly, confirmably seem to always be caught in this ritualistic mess. They seem to live in a complete crazy world, in a la-la land, that they don't want us to think that's what they live in. It's kind of like we're going to maintain a rational, normal human posture even if we are completely batshit crazy, studying, ritualistic child sacrifice to live forever and trying to find some Gilgamesh, some giant's DNA to create a weapon of mass destruction. They don't want you to know their inner world, even though we're observing it, because their inner world seems bonkers. Truly bonkers. But now we are going to take it seriously and actually learn a little about it, and learn about the mythology that no one in the West seems to know, yet it's the only mythology that slays Baal. Baal character seems to be extremely important. They want to revive it. They want to find the DNA. They want to find the tomb. But the very mythology about slaying this character, this creature, is kind of dead to the West. Why are we deleting the beginning of things? All right, before we jump into that, guys, please take a moment to like, subscribe if you're new, share. This channel is getting more and more suppressed. Apparently, my last episode hit some kind of a crazy nerve. So if you haven't watched it, go watch it. Episode 40 as well as 37 are going to be really good fillers for this particular topic. However, both of them pretty much on the second half towards the end. And then, of course, you can support me by finding me on Rumble. I eventually, when my time allows, I do want to do kind of series on Rumble that I will not be able to post on YouTube. World War II related series that definitely cannot be on YouTube. Also follow me on X. My X is also suppressed, but I'm trying to still use it. It's very frustrating. So take a moment to support. Check out my merch store. The links are in the description. I have some cool stuff in there. I try to keep the design classy and elegant. Basically, if I wouldn't wear it, then I try not to make you wear it. So check out the merch store. All the links are in the description and see if there's any way you can support the work that I do. Okay. So let's get into it. I think the best way would be to start with a historian kind of explaining the map, which is the Babylonian Clay Table, which is the world's oldest known world map. And it's by the Babylonians, so it becomes quite key and curious when it pertains to the mythical world of, obviously, Babylon.
Now, the double ring is very important because it has cuneiform writing in it which says it's the bitter river. And this water was deemed to surround the known world because the area inside the double ring is ancient Mesopotamia itself. Now, this word Mesopotamia is the ancient Greek word for what is modern Iraq.
This right here. These kind of designations are very new. They're not as ancient as we think because so-called ancient Mesopotamia, as it pertains to the cradle of civilization, all the inventions, all the writings, Mesopotamia, as it pertains to the historical understanding of what took place in that history, that includes the Armenian highlands, that includes some parts of what now is Turkey, which used to be Armenian highlands, and that includes some parts of Persian Gulf. So just keep that in mind. And you will kind of see that based on the Babylonian old map right here.
So inside the drawing of this circle, we have very interesting things. There is a great river that runs from north to south, which is the Euphrates River. And the river is straddled by a long oblong, which is obviously the city of Babylon. So this is a very important ring of water because it meant for the Babylonians they had a sort of idea of the limits of their world, where they lived, in about the 6th century BC, with these important rivers which brought life and food to them, waterways for transport, all the way down to the Persian Gulf. It was kind of depicted in small. And if you look carefully at the picture, you will see that in the surface of the known world there are these rings drawn with little bits of cuneiform inside those, and those tell you the name of the city which it represents, or sometimes the tribe. So you have encapsulated in this circular diagram the whole of the known world in which people lived, flourished and died.
First of all, you said there was a little contradiction, right? Like, this is supposed to be Mesopotamia, but in modern understanding, they just limit it to Iraq for some reason. However, this is Mesopotamia, because when you read about what's the supposed culture yielded, it does include the region. just if you, of course, mind archaeology and scientific findings and actual history. So if you don't just disregard all that. Now, right here, Urartu, this is the Babylonian word for Ararat, okay? Ararat is, of course, the mountains of Ararat in the Bible, where Noah parks his ark, comes down, and basically that's where the post-flood civilization starts from. He plants his grapes and makes wine, and Ararat is the Armenian name. Sometimes these names get mixed up and disassociated with each other, but in reality we have to always keep in mind that different cultures around us called each other different names, but we held many names in history depending on who called us what, right? So Ararat is the ancient Armenian name due to the location and the mountains. So what's interesting in this map, even though there are mountains all around, there's like, once it zooms out, you'll see on the map itself, it actually calls out mountains right behind Armenia. And that's significant because they all shared the Noah's flood story in Epic of Gilgamesh, in many other mythologies from the region. They shared that. Now here, this Bit Yakin tribe is curious because apparently this tribe ended up taking over Babylon and ruling it, which means, based on the timeline, Baal would actually belong to whatever this tribe is. I don't think I've ever seen anyone to talk about this, although, of course, it's not like I know all the content that exists in the world, so maybe somebody else has talked about that. But this Bit Yakin ends up ruling Babylon. So the wickedness of Babylon as we know it, that comes to a collapse, is due to these rulers, not the Babylonians who drew this map, which is quite interesting. Also, I don't know what that particularly means. I'm just calling it out in case anyone else has some historic information about these tribes.
However, there's more to this map than that, because if you look at the outer ring, you will see that going off at different angles are triangles. Sometimes people say they are islands, sometimes people say they are districts, but in point of fact they are almost certainly mountains, because the idea is that if you go across the water, you see these jutting, pointed things above the horizon, which are remote lands far beyond the limits of the known world, which go out in different directions from the perimeter of existence. And they are, for the Babylonians, places full of magic and full of mystery. Now, when you look at the diagram sort of geometrically, it is evident there were originally 8 of them. And we can be sure of this partly by calculation of what makes sense, but also on the other side, the inscription which I showed you before tells you what is on each of those triangles.
So what is very interesting is, of course, this is an empire, so they're drawing up their map as to what their known world is. And it seems as though it's a bird eye view. And I think it's actually in the back of the cuneiform that they tried to tell you exactly what the map has or what it is. But because there were some pieces missing on the map, they didn't know how to read it. While they can read the back, they couldn't figure out how to count, right? Like, it's a circle. Where does it start? So that they can understand where is the writing starting on that circle and where is it ending. However, eventually they ended up finding one missing piece that, was in the library, because they just kind of took all the pieces and whatever pieces they didn't know what to do with that was all around the same piece, they just kind of put it away until, they have time to sort it out. And one woman sorted it out.
And the discovery was very clear once you realize that the counting was anti-clockwise and not clockwise.
So this piece right here, this little piece, that piece was missing. So now that they have 3 pieces, they realize that it's actually backwards.
So number 4 says, to the 4th, to which you must travel 7 leagues, because it's like a kind of fairy tale. Everybody knows it's always the same introduction. So each time you have to travel 7 leagues across the water. Then it gets a bit broken. Then it says, you see something which are as thick as a parsiktu vessel. This parsiktu measurement is something to an Assyriologist which makes their ears prick. And the fact is, it's only once otherwise known from cuneiform tablets. And it's rather an interesting cuneiform tablet too, because it is the description of the ark which was built, theoretically, in about 1800 BC by the Babylonian version of Noah. And in this account, the details are given, and the god says, you have to do this, this, and this. And then the Babylonian Noah said, I did this, this, and this. I've done it. And I made these structures as thick as a parsiktu vessel, he says out of his own mouth, in the original story. So this word parsiktu is like a kind of noise. It immediately locks in to this thing on the map, immediately and incontrovertibly. So what it means, speaking plainly here, if I may speak plainly here, is that if you went up this mountain all the way with your sandwiches and breaking regularly for lungfuls of fresh air, eventually you would see against the night sky or the dark sky of the outer universe, silhouetted the ribs made of wood as thick as a parsiktu vessel of the wreck of the Babylonian ark, which, like the one in the Bible, came to rest on a mountain. And if you come down the mountain and cross over the water back to the homeland, the first place you come to is called Urartu. It's drawn on the map. Now, the interesting thing about that is that in the Bible, Noah, in his ark, landed on a mountain where the name is Ararat, and Ararat is the Hebrew equivalent of the Assyrian Urartu.
That right there boils my blood. Hebrew equivalent? Not Armenian. For those of you who have been watching me, you kind of already are learning a little bit about what's going on with this history and what kind of efforts are constantly made to delete it and to rewrite it, to reassign it. It's so fascinating to watch my history just constantly being reassigned to other people. And what does Hebrew have anything to do with that history? Nothing. They were not there. They were not around. They were nowhere near just yet based on any historic fact. But we somehow are just throwing it in there because Hebrew must be ancient. Hebrew must be the beginning of things. Hebrew is it's I don't have the correct verbiage for this. And I get a little bit too passionate. I should wheel it back.
That's quite a meaty thing, quite an interesting thing to think about, because it shows that the story was the same, and of course that one led to the other, but also that from the Babylonian point of view, this was a matter-of-fact thing, that if you did go on this journey, you would see the remnants of this historic boat which saved all the life of the world for the long-term future, from which we, of course, profit today. Still there in the crags against the dark sky.
All right, so you get the point about the map. And what's interesting is, one, of course, they just throw in the Hebrew in there, even though it wasn't a thing. Babylonians didn't know there was anything Hebrew. It was, Urartu was Armenia. Ararat was the Armenian word and the Armenian highlands. And Urartu was the Babylonian equivalent to Ararat. That part is true, not Hebrew. Now, what's interesting, I'm thinking about what people know today as Göbekli Tepe, which in Armenian, it's Portasar. So currently it's in Turkey. It would be ancient Armenia, ancient Armenian highlands, called Portasar, which kind of translates to Potbelly. So we have an entire history about that and the migration. And what's kind of interesting, I will one day make this case, but when in the Bible it talks about Ur, I don't think it's talking about Iraq, Uruk of Iraq, because it makes absolutely zero migrational sense when you look at the path. These people are supposed to be coming from the Armenian highlands, migrating west, and on that path, it would make more sense if it's Urfa they're talking about, which is right next to Göbekli Tepe, which is right next to Bortasar, which is one of the oldest place that's being excavated. However, it's being excavated in such closed, controlled way. And sometimes I actually wonder why it's so controlled and what are they actually looking for. Do they maybe know what they're looking for? Because when I read this mythology I'm talking about, and when I read where Hayk defeated Baal, it actually might be a lot closer to Eastern Turkey, which was Western Armenia, than Iraq. Urfa would be exactly on a path where Uruk would be completely on the opposite end of Babylon or Ararat. Like, it's just completely out of the way. Unless there is a note in the Bible that they actually turn out or they were going the wrong way, it doesn't make sense. But either way, the rivers usually guide the story and the rivers run to Armenia. To be fair, I hope they found their Gilgamesh, and I hope they don't ever try to find that anywhere around Armenia, since Göbekli Tepe is in Turkey now. They're welcome to excavate all that, but I just really wonder at this point, why are those excavations so controlled? Is it because they want to make sure that all that Armenian or Christian history doesn't come out? Or is it because they truly are trying to find some mystical character that they want the DNA of? Are these people completely ideologically just lost? Or what's going on there? But here's the BBC News, and it's curious how they speak about it. Archaeologists in Iraq believe they may have found the lost tomb of King Gilgamesh. The Epic of Gilgamesh, written by Middle Eastern scholars 2,500 years before the birth of Christ. Middle Eastern scholars. The word Middle East is also a modern invention, so ignore. It's really remarkable how they've rewritten so much to attribute different civilizational inventions to different cultures, to recreate borders, to erase some and add some. You know, like you think about Iraq and Babylon and all this, and you think about Arabic people. But Arabs were just not even around in those areas. Arabs were in Arabian desert, completely falling outside of that realm. So, but you think of Middle East and you think that entire Islamic world that obviously didn't exist and was completely invented in 10th century. So, they just keep doing this stuff. A German-led expedition has discovered what is thought to be the entire city of Uruk, including where the Euphrates once flowed, the last resting place of its famous king. Euphrates did flow to the regions I'm talking about, including a place called Urfa, biblical Urfa. And I do believe in my other channel, The Silent Oak, I have an entire episode on that. So I think there's even a map on the thumbnail, so you should be able to check that out if you're interested in how I'm making that case, because it's just illogical to think that the biblical migration has to do with Uruk rather than Urfa. Now, they could be disconnected completely, but when we go into the mythology, it just makes me think that it is all talking about that that same region where I can never say that stupid word, where Bortasar is, which is Göbekli Tepe, which I'm going to call it Bortasar because it's just or at least Potbelly, because it's such a bizarre name that's hard to pronounce. And it's also, a renaming, of course. I don't want to say definitely it was the grave of King Gilgamesh, but it looks very similar to that described in Epic. Okay, so this is an interesting one. In the book, a set of inscribed clay tablets, Gilgamesh was described as having been buried under the Euphrates, so under the river, in a tomb apparently constructed when the waters of the ancient river parted following his death. I do really hope they found it, because I don't want them in Armenia, but they're trying to foothold Armenia, so it is starting to be very interesting what path they take. And then why is America all of a sudden interested in Armenia? J.D. Vance is just doing photo ops and it's all about Christianity now. While simultaneously, the current PM, who's a globalist puppet, is trying to kill Armenian Christianity out of Armenia. And a whole lot of funding is happening to bring Judeo-Christianity. So it's hard not to get passionate about this stuff. We found just outside the city an area in the middle of the former Euphrates River the remains of such a building, which could be interpreted as a burial. Okay? Hayk and Bel myth. Lay out the basic summary. Okay. Hayk Narapet, that's the Armenian patriarch. Hayk, Hayastan, Hay, as I said, means Armenia, Armenian, is the foundational national origin story in Armenian mythology and historiography. It is primarily recorded in the 5th century work of Movses Khorenatsi, the father of Armenian history. The tale symbolizes the birth of the Armenian nation through resistance to tyranny, the triumph of freedom, and the establishment of independence in the Armenian highlands. Hayk is portrayed as a mighty archer, giant-like warrior, and patriarch descended from biblical figures. He is the great-grandson of Noah through Noah's son Japheth, then Togarma, making him part of the post-flood lineage. This ties Armenian origin to the biblical flood narrative, with Mount Ararat, where Noah's Ark rested, central to the homeland. So it would be literally central to the Armenian highlands. What's interesting is we have a lot of actually mythologies with all giants. I honestly didn't realize they were all giants because I grew up hearing the tales, but I didn't really read to get the detailed descriptions of things. But recently I read one of them, which is called The Daredevils of Sassoon, and they were giants. And then our most beloved David of Sassoon is also a giant. So it's very curious about these giants, and the Book of Enoch, and Nimrod, of course. Baal was also a giant. So it's quite interesting in what way that this giant mythology preserved. Is it they were just extremely mighty and extremely strong and powerful? Were they truly just physically huge? Were they, like, what does that actually mean in reality? I don't know, but it is curious. After the dispersion of people, often linked to the Tower of the Babel, tyrannical ruler named Bel, or Belus/Baal, Baal, sometimes equated with the Babylonian god Bel Marduk, or the biblical Nimrod, rises in Mesopotamia, Babylon. Bel demands worship and submission from all nations, styling himself as God, king, and oppressor. Reminiscent of some things, right? So he basically demands worship. So now Hayk, refusing to bow to Bel or recognize him as divine, rejects servitude. So he leads his family household, about 300 people, and follows northward from Babylon to the cooler, mountainous region around Mount Ararat and the Armenian highlands, seeking freedom and settling near Lake Van. The battle, okay? Bel pursues Hayk with a massive army to force submission. Here's where the myth is interesting. Bel pursues Hayk, which means he ends up going towards Lake Van. Lake Van would be in, again, eastern Turkey now, which was western Armenia, and it would be extremely close to Godepli Teke, or Potbelly. The decisive confrontation occurs in Hayot's Dzor, Valley of the Armenians, or Battle of Giants. Okay? Traditionally dated to August 11, 2492 BC. Isn't that awfully specific? I don't know why it just blows my mind a little bit for there to be a specific date in a myth. August 11, 2492 BC, is the Battle of Giants. In the clash, Hayk, famous for his skills with longbow, fires a powerful three-feathered or triangular arrow that pierces Bel's chest or breastplate, killing him instantly. Bel's death causes panic and rout among his forces. Aftermath: Hayk buries Bel. The gravesite called Gerizman, meaning grave, is mythically pointed out in tradition. The victory secures independence for Hayk's people, who name their land Hayastan, or Hayk, and themselves Hay, after their patriarch. His descendants, like Armenak, Aram, and others, continue the line, founding the Armenian nation. Aram is the most popular name in Armenia. It is the descendant of Hayk, Aram, and Armenak. The name Armen likely is what Greeks took to call it Armenia. But Aram is a curious one because Aram links to Aramaic, and that entire area that was called Aram, that completely is disassociated with Armenian highlands in Armenia, to a point where I have no idea if there is any link other than just thinking constantly, how bizarre is it that we preserve the name Aram, but today the ancient Aram has nothing to do with us? Or at least that's what we're told. What is the reality? What is Aramaic in reality? I don't know. It's just so many things do not make logical sense because these names do not preserve for no reason. Kind of like Abgar. King Abgar, known to be the guy who corresponded with Jesus, which of course in modern history they're telling you that it's complete mythology and Armenians made it up. Hey, maybe we made it up or maybe we didn't. It's fascinating to me that anything that the Jewish people make up is without a doubt historical fact, and you're anti-Semitic to doubt that they maybe made something up. But anything they don't like or they don't want Armenians to claim, oftentimes are actual history, they just kind of come out and say, well, that just never happened. I don't know if King Abgar truly corresponded with Jesus or not, but I kind of do not also think that it's a 100% made up story when Armenians claim that they have the letters and he did correspond. And Abgar was the king, Armenian king, ruling the more Syriac area. And Abgar today is an Armenian male name. So again, it just preserves in our culture, not in other cultures. Okay, so the myth emphasizes themes of liberty, defiance, national pride, and the heroic ideal of the Armenian people as freedom-loving highlanders resisting lowland empires. That is the story of our lives. And I do think not the myth, but the spirit of the people is exactly how we have both been targeted and killed, and also how we've survived. And another thing that I want to show was very curious to me. I had found it in a Jewish encyclopedia. I don't know what to make of it yet again. This section is talking about supposedly some work that Solomon had wrote. Now, I don't know if I particularly believe that Solomon was a real character or not. That's me personally. Okay, let me just read this. It will be a little bit out of context, but Sefer HaRefut or whatever was written by Solomon. So then it says, Abraham Jagel relates that in his time there came to Rome, from the king of Armenia to Pope Clement VIII, an envoy who disparaged the European physicians, declaring that in his own country they used medical works left to them by Solomon, which were more nearly complete and more systemic than the European works. Now, Jagel thinks it is quite possible that the Armenians might possess medical works of Solomon, inasmuch as they have always remained in their own country, while the Jews, being driven from one country to another, would likely to lose them. This is curious because as far as the medical works go, if you go to the Matenadaran, which is a historic museum, and look into it, and also just look at Armenians in medical history, it is quite remarkable that how active we are in the medical innovations. And in that Matenadaran Historic Museum, there's an entire section of herbs and like concoctions and just medicine related stuff, including brain surgery. Quite interesting that it's saying this. It's talking about Solomon leaving some kind of work. I don't personally believe Solomon is a real character, but I could be wrong. But at the same time, the fact that Armenians are really advanced in medicine, that part is actually true. It is very likely that this is the book of medicine which Hezekiah concealed. Okay? So closely connected with the last mentioned work is Sefer Raziel, as at the end of the description of the book of the medicine transmitted by the angel Raziel to Noah, it is said, to Solomon was revealed the book of secrets, by means of which he ruled over demons and everything in the world. To Solomon was revealed the book of secrets, by means of which he ruled over demons and everything in the world. So what this is sounding like to me, and I could be misunderstanding because it's written in a little bit of a bizarre English. It sounds like there's a book of secrets that helps someone to rule over demons. To me, that sounds like ruling over demons, not working with demons. So then, of course, this is sarcastic, but at the same time, slight truth in it. Is this yet another reason? Are these all piling up to be reasons why Armenians are so targeted to be annihilated? This DNA? Why there's so much interest in Armenia and deleting Armenia? Some kind of a book of secrets from Solomon, some kind of medical works that are supposed to be concealed, that they believe is in Armenia. This is their own encyclopedias, right? I've never, from the Armenian side, I've never heard of such things. Then we have the mythical story of Hayk and Bel, which is the story that basically defeats Baal. Another thing I was curious about is, are there other cultures that have the exact same mythology? Maybe it's not so unique to Armenians. Because if you think about the flood story, so many cultures shared it. This is why I think it became such a prominent and important religion, or it got incorporated into the religion as a creation story, because so many cultures shared the exact same story. Whereas here, I was curious, okay, are there also the same exact stories of, cultures, archetypes defeating Baal? And apparently no. First I said, are there other cultural myths from other cultures that particularly have this defeating Baal Nimrod character? It started with, yes, many Near Eastern and Mediterranean traditions share a storm god hero defeating a tyrant. But that's not what I was asking. I was specifically asking about Nimrod and Baal, right? Then it goes into talking about Baal and Yam, which Baal defeats the sea tyrant Yam. Obviously, that's not what I'm talking about. We're trying to find Baal being defeated, not Baal defeating others. Then there's a Hittite Anatolian one, where storm god slays the serpent dragon. Again, very close to Baal versus Yam, but it's a storm versus, so it didn't fully understand what am I asking. So it's just bringing up anything that kind of sort of sounds similar, right? Some big fight happening technically is what it's bringing up, but that's not what I was asking. So I said, I want only those that are directly defeating Nimrod/Baal. So here it says, got it. If you mean figures explicitly identified with Nimrod, Baal, Bel, not just similar dragon tyrant motives, the list is actually very small. The Armenian Hayk story is the main one. A few others exist. I reviewed those few others and they weren't checking, and we can look at it together. Armenia is full of statues when you visit, and lots of statues where someone is defeating a dragon, or this one is Hayk, the giant archer defeating Bel and all that. So Hayk story is the direct Nimrod Baal defeat tradition. So then later, some Israelite stories came about with Elijah versus Baal worship, it's not killing Baal himself, but a direct anti-Baal victory narrative. So that's not what I'm asking, obviously. Then another Jewish late legend about Nimrod. This one is explicit Nimrod antagonist, though not slain. So, and then there's this Zeus story, which is very different. The Zeus story, it's more interpretive. It wasn't necessarily particularly written to mean this. Later, it was interpreted to mean that. Zeus defeated Nimrod, but again, it's interpretive. So conclusion, strictly direct, Hayk killing Bel, which is Nimrod Baal, is the only clear hero slays Nimrod Baal myth. Then Abraham versus Nimrod and Elijah versus Baal, explicit confrontations but not slayings. So that's quite interesting to me. I was also looking into all the CRISPR technology, the gene editing, all the scientific experiments these people are running. Bill Gates was funding a project that had to do with mosquitoes. What they had done was they engineered a particular self-limiting gene into these engineered mosquitoes. They had the larvae sitting in some kind of antibiotic, which what was it doing? It was protecting these particular set of engineered creatures not to die from the same self-limiting gene that they injected into it. But what happens is then this male goes out and mates with female mosquitoes, the real, I was going to say human, the real female mosquitoes in the wild, and they pass this gene, the self-limiting gene, into the offspring. So now the offspring cannot make it to adulthood. The offspring dies at a young age. And that way they just limit the mosquito population, let's say. So now I actually ran a little bit of a hypothetical exercise with AI. I was like, can you hypothetically do this to people? And it was like, yeah, any creatures who procreate, you can do this too. And there are so many people that would hear such things and they will immediately shut down because they're just like, this is crazy territory. And I think it is, because in reality, if you're going to create a conviction, it has to be based on some kind of a fact or something observable. The only observable thing here is there's a lot of real history being intertwined with this mythical history from the people that's supposed to be rational creatures, not living in fairy tale la la land. But these people do appear to live in fairy tale la la land, running ritualistic stuff and sacrifices, running pedophilia rings, right? One thing that Epstein files revealed is everything that was conspiracy is now a fact, right? Torturing children, just complete ritualistic stuff around children. The fact that the zygotes absolutely think zero of the goyams. And the fact that Epstein did work for Mossad, the fact that they were doing genetic tests to make sure that they only hire Jews, which is a bit oxymoronic. They first created the framework to add Jewishness as an ethnicity into the mix. Later, they are testing people or sending DNA test kits to people to make sure that they are indeed so-called Jewish, whatever they identified as Jewish in the DNA sample case, and then they hire people who they can prove that they are Jewish. My guess would be that it's all psychological, even for them, because I think one thing that's becoming clear is that there is no particular DNA that is Jewish. It's extremely diverse. It's not one race. It's an ideology. It's many people from many races coming together, fancying themselves as a race based on an ideology, a completely effed up ideology that thinks themselves of superior, that wants you to worship them, that thinks of you as nothing. And all that would have been considered an insane conspiracy theory not long ago. Now, due to the files, we see that it's everywhere in the files. The most wealthy in the world is truly a Baal worshipping, satanic, ritualistic, crazy, effed up, psychologically and morally corrupt people that cannot just live a normal life and just smell the roses and touch some grass. But if we notice that they're living in an insane world, then we are told to go touch some grass and not be so crazy and conspiratorial. There's just so much more that I could draw and do a much better job for you to just see how insane that attack is on erasing the Armenian DNA. And I wonder if that's because they clearly despise coherent races. They want to destroy whiteness. That's most people. They despise the Slavic race. They despise the Caucasian race. They despise what they now call whiteness in a European sense, which, is Caucasian. Technically, it's all the same roots. I could go into countless stories and books written by original zygotes fancying themselves as this pure Caucasian race that's highly persecuted for centuries and this and that. And it's just become so interesting to me. It's just, when I read, it feels like I'm reading about Armenians. But Jews are wearing that face. So I don't know what that means. Are they just really wanting to wear this mask, this ancient mask? They just despise Armenians. They want to destroy them and become the most ancient, the most whatever. We don't think, let's say, that we are a superior race and this and that. We think, it's in my episode 37 again, we think that we all are the same because we all come from similar roots in the same place. That's our mentality. And it's more about inclusivity and giving and working together. Whereas in the Jewish version, they just take the same premise, but they turn it into superiority. So that part, I just can't figure out what to make of it, including how they hijacked Ashkenazi name, how they hijacked Sephardic. German Jews in Germany started calling themselves Ashkenazi Jews in 10th century. Then in Spain, they started calling them, this group of people, whoever they are, they started calling themselves Sephardic Jews. So it's just basically the ideology of these people with very different races, right? One is very European, mixed with German and Polish and all sorts of, they speak Yiddish. The other are the Sephardic Jews, who are North African, Spanish, very different. Racially very different. But both start calling themselves Jews. One is Sephardic, one is Ashkenazi. And what's interesting is Ashkenazi in the Bible is in the Armenian highlands, and Sepharad is supposed to be Sardis, which is in Greece. Again, I don't know what to make of it. It feels like some kind of a Baal worshipping tribe, be it Armenian, Greek, I don't exclude the possibility that it could be that these are just some highland tribes like Armenians, Greeks, and Persians, and many others that just kind of were like, screw with these people with their, Christianity. We're just gonna go worship our ancient deities, and then just slowly fancied themselves as a race, but they just became more and more mixed and have turned into whatever they've turned into. Hard to tell. I'm more inclined to think that these are more like Turkic tribes that got obsessed with the highlands and just clearly have destroyed Armenia and Greece and have been rewriting history since then, even though they've absorbed majority of the culture. So technically they do possess the DNA as well now. I can probably just ramble forever. I'm just thinking out loud. I'm just so curious as to who are these people that are clearly very mixed, but everything is just upside down. If you guys made it this far, check out my merch store. I have the ancient Armenian cross, which is quite interesting. I looked up Christian crosses, and the most ancient cross isn't in the list of crosses for Christian crosses. Go and Google ancient or all Christian crosses and see if you can find the most ancient Armenian cross anywhere on that list. It is, I'm telling you, it is just deletion after deletion in every aspect, and very meticulously well done. So then I have Signal Before Silence shirts, as well as hats, mugs, travel mugs. Stop noticing, because honestly, yeah, this is it. This is what they keep doing. They keep threatening us that if we keep noticing, they're gonna make our lives a living hell. They out loud say this. But if we say you're saying this, they will be like, what are you talking about, you crazy moron? What a delusional remark. It's such a psychological operation that they really, really are testing the boundaries at what point a person will go absolutely crazy. So, it's genius. If it wasn't evil, I would say genius, but it's a little too evil for me to marvel over it. So, shenanigans detector, as well as the sun cross, which is one of my favorites. Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed the episode, and again, check the links in the description, my Rumble, my X, my merch store. There's also PayPal, and many people actually have been talking about buy me coffee or something. There's apparently a link like that. I'll look into it, so give me some time. But thank you for your support. Appreciate it. And I'll see you guys next time.